So let's start this off. Hang on. We're going to get closer up here on the mic. And my apologies if you can hear the rain in the background, but the show must go on. I did promise I'll get this video out to you by this Sunday, and come rain or shine, that's what we're going to do. I know it can be a bit irritating if you're wearing headphones, but, well, for me, I find the rain quite relaxing, and with my filters engaged, it shouldn't be too much of an inconvenience. So today we're going to continue from where we left off last week. And that was, well, last week we spoke about Hermeticism and what Hermeticism actually was. And we discussed the beginnings and the evolution of Hermeticism. And so today we're going to talk about the base concepts of Hermeticism, or should I say 10 of the fundamental principles of Hermeticism. And you'll see what I mean when we get stuck in. And we'll do that right now. Now, before we begin, I should point out the whole purpose of this discussion is to give you the big picture, because when you read Hermetic texts, books such as the Corpus Hermeticum, you won't find a bunch of chapters there that clearly defines the principles of Hermetics. These texts are generally laid out in a conversational mode, with generally Hermes Trismegistus speaking and passing on wisdom to one of his disciples. And you'll find all the knowledge there scattered right throughout the book. But it's as I said, it's given as a philosophical discussion. But anyone reading through the book will soon see that throughout the book we keep coming back to certain core concepts and themes. And so if you know nothing about Hermetic law, well, it's very easy to get lost in this philosophical question and answer. And so the key purpose of this discussion is really to give you a macro perspective, an overview of all of these concepts that are discussed within Hermeticism. So when you are reading these texts, you already have the bigger picture that allows you to piece together all these intricate dialogues. And by knowing how all these pieces fit together, or how all these concepts are related, it will make much more sense. So having said all that, now we know exactly where we're going. Let's get on to the concepts themselves now. There are 10 core concepts, or 10 concepts we've identified that are or form the fundamentals of Hermeticism. So the first and most fundamental concept of Hermeticism is the All. The All is the source of creation from which everything in existence emanates. It's beyond our understanding, and it's beyond everything, but it's also within everything. You may think of it as the intelligence of creation, through which the universe unfolds, and all living things, and that includes human beings too, they all contain a spark of this divine intelligence. And the main goal, the great work, the purpose of life, is to realize this spark and return it back to the All. So now let's move on to the principle of mentalism. And as I've often said, the mind is the gateway between the material and the spiritual. And what we can say here is that everything originates in thought. Not human thought, but divine thought. Creation itself is a mental act of the divine mind. This means that reality is structured by consciousness, and a transformation of perception has influences on matter. Now, the next concept deals with how all things are connected, and as it's so famously said, as above, so below. So what we're really saying here is that all levels of reality, the divine, the cosmic, natural and human realms, they all mirror one another. In other words, the macrocosm, or the universe, reflects the microcosm, which may in turn be perceived as the human being. By studying the world, one learns about oneself. By studying oneself, one learns about the divine. And that tells us that a change on one plane can have a direct influence on another. Now we move to that all-important principle of polarity and duality. And this tells us that everything in creation has its opposite, but opposites are complementary, not contradictory. Light and dark, life and death, male and female, these are expressions of the same underlying unity. And our purpose here is to reconcile these opposites, to achieve a balance. I think we all know that the answer never lies in the extremes. The answer always presents itself as the center road. And so this is what the principle of duality and polarity tells us, is that throughout everything in nature, there is a positive and a negative. But the true answer usually lies somewhere in between. The principle of vibration tells us that everything is in a constant state of motion. Even apparently solid matter is in a constant state of flux. And it's interesting to say that in the world of science, this tells us that this theory is actually very true. Everything in nature consists of atoms. Everything is made up through atoms. And every atom is made up of subatomic particles, which in turn, at their most elementary level, all consist of raw energy. And energy is never static. And Hermetic theory suggests that we can interact with this vibration, and in doing so, we can influence our own reality. So next we move on to the principle of cause and effect. And this principle tells us that nothing is left to chance. Nothing happens by chance. Everything happens according to natural laws. So, all phenomena have causes, and all causes have effects. There is no true luck. And understanding this allows us to rise from the position of effect, or being passively shaped by the world, to that of being the cause, and so acting in harmony with the divine law. I guess what this really tells us is that we can steer our own ship, and we should steer our own ship, rather than passively sitting back and waiting for the world to provide opportunities for us. Then we have the principle of rhythm, and this principle tells us that everything in nature moves in cycles, tides, seasons, birth and decay. Hermeticism sees this rhythm as a universal law. All things rise and fall, expand and contract. Hermeticism tells us that we should learn to anticipate and balance these rhythms, to flow with them rather than resist them. And so it is then that we swim with nature's current to achieve what it is that we need to achieve. And struggling against nature's natural flow is always a fruitless endeavour. Now, similar to the principle of duality and polarity, we have the principle of gender, and this tells us that every force contains both masculine and feminine aspects, not in a biological sense, but as archetypal principles of activity and receptivity, creation and conception. Hermetic texts often describe the cosmos as the interplay of these two forces, and this is sometimes known as the sacred marriage, and the sacred marriage symbolizes the union of polarities to produce a spiritual transformation. So similar to the principle of duality, but instead of finding a balance between the two polar opposites, what we're actually doing is bringing these two opposites together to find a new meaning. So now we come to the great work, the Magnus Opus, the return to the One. And this is accomplished by seeking the knowledge, the inner spiritual knowledge, the spark of the great divine, the spark of the all. And so, yes, as all things move in rhythms and cycles, we've gone full circle, and we're back to our first principle, the all and the one. Now, if you remember, we said that every living thing contains a spark of the divine, and the purpose of existence and life itself is through knowledge and through understanding to seek out that spark and return back to the all. And so then, this is the Magnus Opus, the great work. It's accomplished from the alchemist's perspective as turning lead into gold. But what this really means in Hermetic terms is that through wisdom and knowledge that we gain enlightenment and finally understand our true beginnings and our true nature and our true purpose, and so realize our unity and place within the One. And this last principle tells us that science, nature, and spirituality are not in opposition. Just as nature is the creative intelligence, the divine intelligence, and spirituality is our place, or understanding our place within the divine, then science is the gospel that tells us what we know of the world. Philosophy is a set of ideas and theories that tell us about existence and the world. And these ideas have been thought about by some of the greatest minds and handed down from generation to generation. Science, on the other hand, gives us empirical proof of how the world works. And seeing as, from a Hermetic perspective, that understanding and the truth are the main goals, then it's completely rational that we would want to embrace science to tell us the details, the proven details of how the world actually works. But science is very open in telling us that it can't explain everything. It doesn't understand absolutely everything. And everything in the scientific world starts with a theory, an idea, a hypothesis, and then it's these ideas that are put to the test. And as we learn more and prove more, we understand more. The remarkable thing is, though, is that those philosophies that have been put to the test seem to have turned out to be really quite accurate, with quantum physics now truly starting to, for the first time, untangle the workings of the universe. We see, rather than opposing these philosophies that have been handed down through the generations, that science is actually filling in the details. And so we see science, nature, and spirituality all working together for the same cause. And amongst them, they all have exactly the same purpose. They seek the truth. So I hope you've all enjoyed today's discussion on the core concepts and principles of Hermeticism. And I just want to jump in here and say that a number of you may have noticed that we've now started to release our videos on Sunday rather than Saturday. And we'll try to get our videos out on Sundays at 5 p.m. Now, I can't guarantee they'll be every Sunday, but I'll try to get at least one of these longer type videos out at least once a fortnight. We all live busy lives these days, and I know that some of you just don't have the time to watch a 15-minute video all the way through, so I've been trying to pick out various highlights from the videos that I think are of interest. So I'll be putting a few of those out in the meantime, and there's also the live stream that I'm working on and I'm trying to get one prepared for this Friday. Is it this Friday? The 31st of October, you know the one, Halloween. So I've done various live streams in the lead up to that as preparation, and I've not quite made up my mind there exactly just yet as to whether that's going to be an audio visual or whether or not we're going to have a proper Halloween party and have a bit of a chat in between things. So, well, we'll see how that goes, but that'll be Friday the 31st, so if you can make it, then I'll see you then. But the next long-form video, I think, will probably be a fortnight Sunday. And that will be Hermeticism versus Gnosticism versus Neoplatonism, and how they overlap, the similarities, and how they differ. And episode 4, following on from that, will be Hermeticism in the Modern World, and I'm really looking forward to doing that one. And we'll talk about the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley and what else, Wicca, and perhaps we'll even see how Hermeticism has affected psychology or has influenced modern-day psychology. So, with that, I'll look forward to seeing you all again on Friday the 31st, I hope. And with that, I'll see you then. And, oh yeah, don't forget the old thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in this content. And all of that. And so, I'll see you, I hope, all very soon.